So thank you everyone for joining us for today. And this is one of the most important discussions on healthcare challenges and hacks. So the healthcare system is a topic that affects all of us today. And we are going to explore innovative solutions to some of the most pressing challenges. So I am going to introduce the panelists. We are fortunate to have two incredible thought leaders with us today. Dr. Jeffrey Singer. He is a senior fellow at Cato Institute and a practicing surgeon with deep insights into the intersection of policy and practice. And Daniel Fylstra, an entrepreneur and pioneer in technology solutions, who brings a unique perspective on how innovation can transform healthcare. Welcome. Yeah. So, yeah. So let's begin with broad perspective. So, what do you see as a most significant challenges facing healthcare system today? Each one of you, if you could give a kind of a big picture of healthcare system here in US.
That's a loaded question. There's so many challenges to healthcare, but if you want to look at it in because there are a lot of people here from other countries, and I don't want to get too specific about the US system. I want to talk about things that kind of apply universally. And universally speaking, the governments around the world don't respect the autonomy of adults. They presume to know what's better for us regarding what medications we can take. In cases of the United States FDA, not only does the government say what medications it thinks that it is safe for us to take, it decides whether it thinks it's going to work, and sometimes it bases its decision on that. That violates our right as autonomous adults to make our own healthcare decisions, and our right to self-medicate, because that's part of autonomy. So if we approach the health issues from that more general philosophical framework, you could pretty much apply what I just said in virtually every country, that you have governments deciding what people can take, what kind of healthcare practitioners they're allowed to consult, and in many cases that requiring them to get permission slips, those we call them prescriptions, from those healthcare practitioners that they authorize them to get advice from.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I guess my perspective on this, I sort of represent so Dr. Singer here is a real physician who has a lot of expertise, and I kind of represent the individual and the biohacker perspective, because I have tried a number of things that are maybe on the edge of modern healthcare, and I'm happy to talk about those things. So, some of I think all of you here probably are aware of the role of the FDA in the United States, and there are similar regulatory agencies in other countries that restrict what you can do, and even restrict what somebody like Dr. Singer can do. But there's also the matter of the government plays a very large role in this country, and even a larger role in some other countries, in controlling healthcare, and thereby driving up the cost of healthcare. And so there are many things that many of us cannot afford because the costs are much higher than they would need to be in anything resembling a free market. And so now I would say the good news is there are things you can do about this. There are some ways to work around the system, and hopefully we can talk about a few of those things. I've done some of these things. Just to cite three things off the top here quickly, there's off-label prescriptions, which any physician can act upon. There's the idea of participating in a human clinical trial to gain access to innovative therapies and drugs, and I've done that 3 different times. And then there's what you might call medical tourism. That is, if you're in the United States, seeking care outside, or vice versa, actually. If you're in Canada, a lot of people come to the United States. So we can say more about those things.
Yeah. So, sir, what are the ethical considerations and the potential benefits of expanding access to the clinical trials? Should patients have more options to participate in these trials and access the investigational drugs? What is your thoughts on that?
I think we need to allow people with informed consent to participate in human clinical trials. That would help actually advance knowledge in medicine a lot of times, because there are ethical reasons, obviously, where if you're involved in a clinical trial involving humans, you don't want to harm someone. And also, if you find out that a drug is working very well, the people who are in the placebo arm of that trial are not getting that drug that could be saving their life in the middle of the trial. So there's a lot of ethical issues involved, but again, we get back to autonomy. And if adults are given, are fully informed and giving informed consent, allowing for more live human trials will be really hasten the development of a lot of drugs, which right now take many, many years to come through the whole drug approval process.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey, for
I'm
that.
sure he wants
So
to
I'll just
say.
say a few more words about that. One thing is the world of clinical trials is probably broader in the United States than many people might appreciate. I mean, you've probably all heard about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials to bring a drug to market, but that's not all that's going on. There are quite a number of, by quite a number, I mean hundreds to thousands at any given point in time. There are human clinical trials underway, as well as, by the way, animal studies and that sort of thing. And one of my messages is simply, first of all, take responsibility for your own health care and your own self-knowledge of what's coming. I would say this, you've all probably heard about peer-reviewed scientific publications, right? Well, all of those, like everything, is available on the internet, and very rarely is it gated. I mean, usually you can simply go to the NIH or to it's a variety of public sites and access the latest research. And what I'm trying to tell you is it's readable. I mean, any decently written human clinical trial, you have to maybe practice a little bit and get used to reading these studies, but everyone in this room can read published research literature and draw sensible conclusions, especially after you've read, a few score of these things. And I really want to encourage people to do that. So in clinical trials, in addition to the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, there are trials that are simply designed to answer some scientific question. And really all 3 of the clinical trials in which I have personally participated as a volunteer have been of that nature. And now there still is the whole protocol involving informed consent. There's normally there's an institutional review board, an IRB, that is supervising it. You do have to get clearance from the FDA to conduct this kind of a trial, but you might be surprised about the spectrum, the range of studies that are authorized even by the FDA, that can be pretty interesting.
Can I make a few comments about that? Aside from authorized by the FDA, there are a lot of clinical trials that take place outside of the FDA's purview. For example, much of what we know today about the therapeutic benefits of psychedelics was not done under the auspices of the FDA or the NIH or any other governmental agency. This was just done out in the field by people who were interested. And now it's as you know, with a recent decision by the FDA to delay a decision about legalizing MDMA for therapeutic use. Because once you put the government involved, get the government involved, it's subject to all sorts of political pressures and special interest pressures. But that's one point I wanted to make about that. And then I wanted to talk about, when you mentioned off-label use, a lot of people may not know what that means, especially people from other countries. So first I wanted to bring to everybody's attention a little plug. This is a white paper I did with Michael Cannon from the Cato Institute a couple years ago called Drug Reformation. And I know that Pericles Niarchos from the Cato Institute, he's got a libertarian, there he's waving his hand, he has libertarianism.org table outside, and you can get a copy for yourself there of this. But just for you to know that starting with the key, in 1962, I don't want to get too into the weeds, but in the United States, up until 1962, the FDA's sole mission was to decide if something was safe. So if you were a drug company and wanted to put a product on the market, you had to convince them that it wasn't going to hurt anybody, it was safe. That's all. Then in the 1960s, they added this additional requirement, safe and effective. And then in order to do that, that's what gave these extensive clinical trials, lengthened the approval process, added to the expense. But when you sent in your application, you had to say what you were proposing the drug to be used for. That was so then it would give you the label, if they approved it, would say, this drug is approved as safe and effective for the treatment of condition A, okay? But ever since this rule has been in effect, the FDA's position is, once it's approved for condition A, you clinicians out there, you're free to use it for anything that you think, based on your knowledge of how the drug works, that it might be helpful for, and you can conduct your own clinical trials on those applications of it. And that's called off-label use, because you're using it for something that the label didn't say it's effective for. Today, roughly 20% of all prescriptions in the United States are so-called off-label prescriptions, where doctors are prescribing it for something. Well, for example, now we're seeing it's widely accepted that ketamine, which is approved as an anesthetic, can be a very effective treatment for severe depression and maybe even PTSD, but that's an off-label use. But it's legal, so as far as the government's concerned, you can go ahead and do that. I've always asked the question, well, if you're telling me I had to wait 10 years for this drug to be approved for condition A, but then say, once it's approved for condition A, you know, you're a doctor. We don't presume to know what you know. You could use it for B through Z, just use your judgment. Well, then why couldn't I use it for A through Z? That's the first question I ask. Anyway, I don't want to monopolize this, but I wanted to explain to people who may not know what that was.
So, sir, like going forward, we would be talking about the drug lag and loss of innovation. So what are the regulatory hurdles you think that would stifle like the innovations and delay in the availability of promising drugs? And what policy changes would you like to foster to like more permissive environment for medical advancement without compromising patient safety?
You want to go first?
The short answer is the government should not be in the business of, certainly restricting drug access based on their notion of efficacy. I mean, that, you can make an argument for safety, although one could even argue that one, but really, well, an excellent argument for this is a book called Death by Regulation by our own Mary Ruart here. You can get it on Amazon very easily, makes the case very well. One of the statistics I recall from that book is that she analyzed the drug approvals, the drugs that came to market before and after. This is the Kefauver amendments in the early 60s, when the FDA gained the power to determine whether drugs could be marketed at all, and the frequency with which drugs were found later after FDA approval to be of some danger to people was measured before. It was also measured after the Kefauver amendments, and this did not change. The frequency of drugs that became serious issues for people was not improved or anything during that time frame, but the cost and the time to bring drugs to market, I mean, it was like 10 times more expensive and 10 times longer time in order to bring a drug to market. So what you'd like to see that is at least see that rolled back. Now, one could certainly go further.
Well, that's what our drug reformation white paper is all about. How do we? So, and we in our paper, Michael Cannon and I come up with various proposals. But at the end of the day, we point out that you don't need an FDA. But just a little bit of history. In 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act was passed. Up until then, there was no government involvement in this at all. And you could argue that that was basically a truth in advertising act. It basically said that any drug on the market, we're going to create a Bureau of Chemistry that's going to test it. And if it doesn't have in it what you say it has, then we're going to hold you responsible. And if you put something in it that could affect, your mind, like alcohol or opium, you need to put it on the label so the consumer knows that. That was all it was designed to do. And I could certainly live with that because I'm against fraud, and I'm sure everybody in this room is. So you could argue that's a legitimate act. Then in the mid-30s, after there was deaths from formulation of the first ever antibiotic, sulfanilamide, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was passed in 1938 and said, okay, from this point forward, you got to convince us it's safe before we'll let you market it. But everything that's already on the market, like aspirin, 2 kinds of insulin, which you could still get over the counter, most people don't know this, regular and NPH insulin, and everything else, well, it's already been around, so it's grandfathered. And then that evolved into 1951 saying, we, the FDA, are going to decide what's prescription only and what's over the counter. Up until 51, the drug maker would decide, and they have that, that's a private business decision. So in other words, the way it would be the manufacturer of a pharmaceutical product would say, this is complicated. If somebody uses it the wrong way, there's something bad will happen. We're going to get sued. So let's stipulate to the pharmacists who are going to retail this, we only want you to sell it to people who show you they have a prescription from a professional. That'll take us off the hook liability-wise. Well, that's perfectly okay. That's the way it was. But starting in 1951 with the Durham-Humphrey amendments, Hubert Humphrey, you may have heard of him, that was taken away from the civil society and put in the hands of government and politicized. So that's why, for example, to this day in the United States, women can't get birth control pills over the counter except for now one inefficient type, one brand of one inefficient type, whereas they can get it over the counter in 100 countries. And every medical professional organization has been saying for decades, you don't need to come to see me for this. You should be able to get this over the counter. Why has the FDA not allowed it to be over the counter? Well, obviously there's political pressures involved. So all of these things can be replaced with private sector vetting organizations. I mean, prior to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and up until the mid-1950s, for example, the American Medical Association had its Committee on Pharmacy and Chemistry that would test all of these drugs on the market and report on them and tell physicians whether or not they thought it was safe. And that was a private organization and many others.
So sir, as we were discussing initially, there are a lot of international audience over here. So I wanted to ask a question, what are the core principles that should guide global healthcare system to prioritize individual liberty and minimize government intervention and maximize patient choices? From a global perspective, what are the core principles do you think that we need to adopt going forward?
You go first? Or
From a global perspective, governments should stay out of it. Sort of the very short version. It serves us all. In fact, if there is a competitive marketplace, even among countries, for healthcare. And another thing I would communicate to everybody is that I think for people in the United States, there's a general presumption that healthcare is best in the United States. And that's kind of an out-of-date presumption. I personally have experience with a country of Panama where I can walk into a hospital there that's affiliated with Johns Hopkins, US trained physicians. No, there's no health insurance, there's no all of the bureaucracy that you're used to doing, and it might cost you $25 or it might cost you $35 for a physician to spend 20 or 30 minutes with you. That's what healthcare can be. So. I would like to not encourage, I mean, all we need is a global organization dictating to everyone everywhere. Anyway, that would be
I think the global principle, like you said, is really the presumption of liberty. So not just when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to all public policy, we should start with the presumption that we are all adults who own ourselves, we're sovereign, we're autonomous, and any policy intervention in any area, from healthcare to, well, you name it, has to start with how am I respecting that? And there are legitimate, unless you're an anarchist, and I'm not, so there are legitimate roles for the government to play in certain areas of human interaction, but they basically should be involved with enforcing the harm principle and respecting liberty. And same thing which should pertain to health policy.
I guess I would just add to that it means that for all of us as individuals, we need to take personal responsibility and learn. That is, take it upon yourself to learn more about both current healthcare and also what's coming. Because one thing that we should probably say is, what's coming is quite wonderful. I mean, I'm particularly interested and follow quite closely and have a lot of friends in the biotech world of anti-aging research. And what's coming, what's almost here is amazing, almost beyond words. And if you talk about innovation, we don't need government to encourage this. I mean, what is the market for a drug that would help people live longer and healthfully, live in their later years with greater health span instead of just lifespan? That market is, 6 or 7 billion people, by as much as they can afford, right? I mean, is there a lack of incentive here? I don't think so.
Thank you, sir. And also, you were also talking about offshore medical tourism prior. So what are the benefits and risks you seem to be associated with seeking medical care treatment abroad? And what are the destinations do you think the people are preferring to go outside?
People are going to Mexico, they're going to Thailand is another popular destination. I think India is also one. That's fine. People need to do what's in their own best interests. And some of these offshore health centers are basically ways out of the regulatory regime that exists here and in most of the world. So, and another thing I might add is I'm seeing more and more. There was recent article in the major press in the United States about people doing DIY drugs. You might have, and that's an example of that. So many people are unaware that they could take advantage of compounding pharmacies in the United States. Compounding pharmacies, before the pharmaceutical explosion, almost all drugs were compounded. You went to a and they're still trained in how to do that. And the FDA doesn't regulate compounding pharmacists. So if you're compounding a medication that's been recommended and prescribed, that's what RX stands for, recipe. It used to be the doctor would write the recipe, and you go to the pharmacist and they make it. And so the FDA won't regulate compounding pharmacists making drugs because they look at it as the pharmacist is making up a product to order, customizing it. But if it is the identical product as one that's commercially available, then they prohibit it to protect the manufacturer. We're seeing that right now with the GLP-1s that are useful for losing weight. It was such a run on them because when word got out that the semaglutides and tirzepatide could reduce food craving and help you lose weight, doctors were prescribing it gangbusters, and the manufacturers were overwhelmed with demand, so there became a shortage. So the FDA gave permission for the compounding pharmacists temporarily to make the identical product because it's a shortage. And now one of them, I think it's Wegovy, the shortage has just been announced to have been over. The manufacturer caught up with demand. So the FDA wants the compounding pharmacists to stop compounding the identical equivalent of Wegovy because it's commercially available. and they're trying to figure ways around it by making it maybe a tiny bit different, so it's not the same as the commercially available one. But this is another frontier here where a lot of people can get around the whole regulatory regime and the FDA's interference with self-medication by taking advantage of the exclusion of compounding pharmacies from the FDA's reach.
Yeah, and a general comment here is across different countries, I would never presume that things are wonderful in one country for all the physicians and all the facilities and all the clinics in that country. You really need to do your homework on the individual clinic. In every country, including this one, I'm afraid, there are really good and really not so good clinics, and even with and without licensed physicians. I wanted to mention, by the way, because I don't think it came up earlier, if you want to find out about human clinical trials, there is a government website, clinicaltrials.gov, and just visit it, and you'll find thousands of trials, and you have to do there's a whole bunch of search tools on there to help find something that might be of interest to you, but you can do that yourself. And I just want to underline this whole idea of educate yourself, be prepared to make your own decisions, know enough about the system. Like, you probably are learning some things here, hopefully, about, even I've learned some things here about, about off-label use in clinical trials and medical tourism that you can take advantage of. Here's one more thing. Does everyone know that you can order your own blood tests effectively? Several people are nodding. I'm not sure about everyone is, but so Quest Diagnostics and LabCorp are the two major, firms that operate blood draw and blood testing clinics around the nation. But you can, although a physician, and if you should have a friendly physician with a forward-looking, research-oriented, you should have a friendly relationship with a kind of physician who is aware of the current literature and is open-minded. Okay. That's what I would say. But you can go, you can get almost anything from LabCorp through Life Extension Foundation, lifeextension.com. You can get almost anything from Quest through several, but ultalabs.com is one that I use. And, educate yourself and like a CBC chemistry panel costs almost nothing. I mean, it's like $39 or $29 or something.
But I think there are a couple of states, I think maybe, unless it's changed, New Jersey and New York, I think, have some restrictions on what you can order for yourself.
So
again, not respecting your autonomy.
Yeah, exactly. But be aware that that's an option for you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So moving on to there is a lot of craze going around artificial intelligence and machine learning. So what is your take on AI and machine learning revolutionizing the healthcare system going forward?
As a clinician, I can tell you, well, first of all, as a writer, because I write a lot, AI is great. I'm learning more and more how I could use it, whether I use Grammarly or I ask ChatGPT to edit something I wrote. I mean, AI is very helpful, and I don't see why it won't be equally helpful to clinicians trying to kind of run through diagnostic possibilities and come up, or ask for instantly. You could have AI kind of give you a list of the literature on this for you as a clinician to now review. Instead of you spending hours digging through search engines, it could just spit out maybe 20 studies on this, and now you could read them and get yourself educated as a doctor. I don't think it's going to completely replace the practice of medicine, because there's a certain amount of medicine, as they say, the art and the science, and there's human interaction, there's reading a person's body language when you're trying to diagnose their problem. And then maybe you may not agree with me on this, but I really think there is such a thing as intuitive knowledge. I've been doing this for 40 years as practicing surgery, and there have been numerous occasions where, for some reason that I could not even explain, I did something slightly differently than I usually do. In this particular case, either in the middle of a surgery, I decided to do something a little different, or in the middle of trying to do a diagnostic workup, I ordered a test that I don't usually order. And if you asked me to explain why, I probably couldn't even explain why, but turns out I was really glad I did, because that's exactly what the right thing was. And that's just because, you accumulate knowledge over the years, and a lot of this is almost beneath the surface and it gives you these hunches that you otherwise wouldn't have. And I don't think that should be completely dismissed. I think there's a role for that, and there always will be. Do you agree with that, by the way?
Yeah, I do very much. So so my overall background actually is in software and analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence and so on. That's sort of my mainline professional career. You know, the biohacking is just a personal activity, if you will. But I can tell you that machine learning has made a huge difference across the board in biotech. You know, so one part of my background is I was involved first as an investor and then CEO of a biotech startup company about 20 years ago. And even then, we were able to do certain things that just weren't possible before because we had applied machine learning, and we isolated the promoter of the telomerase gene, HTER, you know, in that company at that time. But today, I think, does everyone know that the protein folding problem is basically a solved problem? And does everybody understand what a big deal that is? So your body is made of proteins almost entirely, right? The whole construction of everything, from neurons to blood cells to muscle to everything, it's all based on proteins. And proteins are chains of amino acids that fold in really complex, crazy ways. They fold because of the atomic forces between the elements of a long chain, and what a protein can do, you know, its function, and the fact that it can catalyze reaction, the fact that it can find its way, the fact that, you know, the so-called spike protein can attach to, you know, some of your cells in a very deleterious way. That's all a matter of the conformance and, you know, how that protein folds. So that was a practically insoluble problem for decades and decades, and now it's completely solved, meaning the folding structure of almost every protein in every human and animal has been resolved by this software that, well, there have been several projects, but the big one's in the United Kingdom, I think. So, yeah, there's been a huge impact, and there will be from here on out, I'm sure.
Thank you. So thank you, Jeffrey and Daniel, for sharing your expertise and ideas with us today. So right now we open it for the audience, and you can ask your questions.
This question is for Daniel. I know you've done some biohacking yourself. Would you care to share any of it with the audience? Because I think they'd be interested.
Sure. Happy to do that. First, on the category of off-label use of previously approved prescription drugs. Is this better? Okay. So yeah, happy to do that. So first, we talked about the off-label use of prescription drugs. I'll give you 3 examples of things that I'm actually doing myself, but I think they're of quite general interest. The first one, we were talking about this earlier, is metformin. Now, how many people have heard of metformin? Almost everybody, I think, yeah. So metformin is, you know, the most commonly prescribed drug for diabetes and even for pre-diabetes. And yes, it's a very good idea to take advantage of that. But there have been many studies in many model organisms, you know, laboratory rats and even more primitive organisms, about the effect of metformin on aging. And it does seem to have an effect of delaying aging. It represses mTOR and upregulates AMPK. But anyway, if you can talk to a physician who's open-minded and familiar with the literature, you know, you could probably get a prescription for metformin, even if your hemoglobin A1C hit 5.7% once, you know. And so I take a low dose, 250 milligrams of metformin every day, and it's just as an anti-aging preventative. Now, a little further along the risk spectrum, if you will, but not much, is rapamycin. So rapamycin's a drug that's been around for decades, discovered on Easter Island. That's where it got its name. And it's known by physicians as a drug to suppress the immune system in organ transplants. And if you talk to your doctor, that's probably what they'll say. And they'll say, well, you certainly don't want that, right? You don't want to suppress your immune system by any means. However, that's true when you take metformin, when you take rapamycin in daily doses where it accumulates in your bloodstream. Its half-life is about 72 hours. And you get this total effect of immune suppression. If instead you take rapamycin like once a week in doses most people are using around 5, 6, up to sometimes 10 milligrams. So so like in a week it's dissipated from your bloodstream. Then its effects are very different, and it's actually an immune enhancer, and it is actually in more animal studies than any other compound. Rapamycin has been shown to extend lifespans by 20% in laboratory mice and so on. And there is right now a primate study, this is marmosets, monkeys, been going on for 16 years, where there's a control group and another group that was being given rapamycin, and sure enough, those monkeys are outliving the controls by about 20% in lifespan. In fact, somebody told me offhand that of the 6 monkeys who are still alive in that study, 5 of them were in the rapamycin group and 1 of them is in the control group. So that is also
off-label uses of
it's
those
an
drugs.
off-label use of a prescription drug. And now for the newest and maybe the most interesting one, interesting to men, but should be interesting to women as well. So there's been a study where something like, I believe the number is like 270,000 men who sought treatment for erectile dysfunction were followed up on for decades, right? And of course the study had various purposes, and then a retrospective analysis of all this was done. And here's the interesting thing. So of all these men who sought treatment for ED, quite a few of them, a large group, took PDE5 inhibitors, Viagra, Cialis, and so on. And a number of others elected not to. Now the interesting thing is that decades later, the group of people who had taken the PDE5 inhibitors had 44% fewer incidents of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. It's a pretty striking difference over a large audience. And on further analysis, the men who had the most, the greatest reduction in frequency over population were the men who were frequent users of the PDE5 inhibitors, and people who used it once a month or once a week still had a benefit, but it wasn't as great. So that has led to the idea of off-label use at low doses, because you don't want to have this every day, but daily Cialis at 2.5 milligrams is something that you could take to, as an anti-aging preventative, for which I think that there is reasonable support. Now maybe I should stop there, because I haven't talked about the human clinical trials, but that's a whole nother subject.
Hi, I'm Dominic from Poland, and I'm a researcher at the university, and my question concerns the research as well, and especially the companies like Elsevier, which make the paywall. You have to pay for the access to a scientific paper, and I wanted to ask you about that, about your view on open access knowledge, like open access to scientific papers, because I think Elsevier has the biggest margin profit, bigger than Google and Microsoft in recent years, and I wanted to ask you about the view on that. Should the science be open to everybody, or should we pay for that? Because the Elsevier doesn't pay nor for the researchers, neither the peers that make the peer review, right? So yeah.
I wrote an article in Reason magazine about 2 years ago that I hope you guys will read if you haven't already, called Against Scientific Gatekeeping. for which, by the way, I caught a whole lot of flack on Twitter or X. And so I agree with you. I think that, again, we're all adults and we have a right to make our own decisions and do our own due diligence. And as Dan mentioned, nowadays you can pretty much get access to all this information. I think it should be, I don't think anybody has a monopoly on the right answer. I think one of the reasons why we're seeing in the last few years such an increase in distrust for our public health agencies is because during the pandemic, the elite class in charge of pandemic policy was not willing to hear any sort of suggestions or critiques or opinions from other people who, some within their own discipline, who just had a differing point of view and wanted to suggest something different. Or there's also this attitude of, if you're not credentialed in my discipline, then you have no right to even comment on this. For example, and I talk about this in my article, when Scott Atlas, who is a renowned radiologist and is the author of the textbook on brain MRI imaging. He was a professor for many years at Stanford, now he's at the Hoover Institution, and he was criticizing some of the pandemic policy. He was dismissed as, what would you know? You're just a radiologist. Well, in fact, he reads and he reviews scientific papers for a living and knows how to critically review scientific papers and is familiar with literature. Why are you dismissing him? So that was a long-winded way of answering your point, that it's those kind of things that stand in the way of progress. And obviously there are experts and there are people who spend a lot of time studying a particular area, and we should take them seriously, but we shouldn't close ourselves off to comments from other intelligent people who might be seeing something that, they're outside of our bubble, so they could pick up something that we never would have noticed otherwise.
Just coming, science, real science, that is the scientific method, hypotheses, testing, replication, peer review, that's something I believe in. It's something it's really got credibility, and I'm talking about real science, sort of from the bottom up. Anthony Fauci science, or I am science, if you're criticizing me, you're criticizing science, that's just government bureaucrat talk. And I think we all have learned that by now. And it's, just keep that in mind. And I think there is possibly an issue about copyright, like the people who incur all the expense of copyright, collecting and editing and publishing scientific literature probably have some copyright rights. But hey, we have the most amazing availability today compared to what we can remember 10 years, 15 years, 20 years ago. Just take advantage of it.
Hello, Jeff Crawford from Texas. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering, with RFK Jr. being nominated at least, is there any opportunity for you or some more libertarian-minded colleagues to have potential input into what might be an unusual opportunity to change the FDA?
It's interesting you said that. I think it was on November 12th. I don't know if anybody listens to the Cato Daily podcast, but you can get it at the Cato website. I discussed that very issue. The title of the podcast was RFK Jr., #MAHA, and public health. And it's a mixed bag, I think, because I think what I'm worried about is a lot of people who've been upset with the public health establishment, which they have good reason to be, are going to be thinking, good, now instead of us having to listen to those people, now everybody's going to have to listen to our people. And that's not what I want to see it happen. I want to see it, and I happen to disagree with a lot of his views on a lot of issues. On the other hand, there's opportunity, because I agree with him that all the public health agencies need a total reformation, and that provides opportunities for people like me and others in our movement who've written about this to maybe get some attention to our work. So that's a good thing. And like I said, some issues I think he's right, but I think I think, and what I say in the podcast, is that what's being missed in all this is, and nobody discusses this, is what is public health and what is the role of the government in public health. And I argue that the liberal view of public health, it relates to health issues that result from the unknowing or unintended consequences of their activities that could harm others, such as, dumping toxic waste in the public square or having a highly contagious disease that you're walking around with and can give to others. That's a public health issue. The other issues, like should you take metformin as an anti-aging drug, or should you get the shingles vaccine, which could have side effects, but it's not like you can give shingles to someone else. So those are what I call private health issues. These are matters that individuals make their own decisions, consulting whoever they choose. And unfortunately, over the years, the broad understanding of public health is everything. So everything that has to do with health remotely. And that's a problem, and it doesn't appear to me, at least, that RFK Jr. is interested in getting public health back to being public health. He just has a different idea of what our private health should be, and that worries me.
I would just say, in the light of I'm certainly encouraged to see things getting shaken up, including in Health and Human Services. I would comment that we do have someone in the room who would be qualified to be FDA commissioner, and I believe there's some kind of petition mechanism. I don't have it, or I don't know the link, but somebody in the room does have the link for Mary Ruwart as FDA commissioner, and that would be a great move.
Also, there was a recent report in the Wall Street Journal last week, before RFK was nominated. Apparently, sources close to him said that among the people he is looking at to appoint to public health agencies are people we may have heard of, like Dr. Marty McCary from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, who is now the Surgeon General of Florida. He was at UCLA and kind of was run out of there because of his questioning of our pandemic policy. And Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. And that, to me, is encouraging. That's a good thing. These people are very open to entertaining heterodox viewpoints. They are true scientists. The other, another thing that happened, this is a personal anecdote, when over the summer at the Cato Institute, we hosted a private screening of this movie. Now it's available to everyone, called COVID Collateral, Where Do We Go for the Truth? It was a documentary featuring Jay Bhattacharya and Scott Atlas and others. Afterwards, I had a discussion with the filmmaker and Jay Bhattacharya, Robert Redfield, who agreed to participate. He was the CDC director. And you can watch that online at Cato. But Robert Redfield surprised me. I had him on because I wanted somebody to defend what they did. It turns out he basically said, you guys were right and we were wrong. And in private, in our green room before we go onto the stage, apparently he's developed a friendship with Bhattacharya and said to him, I overheard this. I didn't let anybody know I heard it. He said, by the way, because he's connected to the people in the Trump team, if Trump were to get in, I've already recommended you for CDC director. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm thinking, here's a guy with a PhD in economics. Most people don't know his PhD is in economics. His MD is obviously an MD, but most MD PhDs have a PhD in something like physiology or biochemistry. His is in economics. And I'm thinking a person who's dealing with public health issues, who's got the instincts for considering trade-offs that an economist would have, combined with the knowledge of medicine, that's probably a good combination.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists and to our lovely moderator, Sugandhi.